The spark in Shadow Creek. The sun hung low over the red rock formations of Shadow Creek, Arizona, painting the desert in hues of amber and gold. Rachel Morrison guided her Kawasaki Ninja through the deserted highway, the powerful engine humming steadily beneath her. 15 years of service as a Navy SEAL had left Rachel with more scars than she could count and memories she tried hard to forget. Shadow Creek was supposed to be a pit stop, a quiet detour on her way to nowhere in particular. She had been chasing solitude, hoping the stillness of the desert might silence the echoes of her past. As she pulled into Johnson's gas station, Rachel's sharp eyes immediately swept the surroundings, noting every detail. The rundown pumps, a rusted ice freezer by the store, and the weathered old man behind the counter. Joe Johnson, the owner, acknowledged her with a slight nod. His eyes held a quiet understanding, the kind you only see in those who've walked through fire themselves. Joe's years as an Air Force pararescueman hadn't just given him the skills to save lives. They'd also taught him to recognize a fellow warrior. "Long road," Joe commented as Rachel entered the shop and grabbed a cup of coffee. "Needed the ride," she replied simply. She paid in cash, exchanged a nod, and turned toward the door. But before she could step outside, the roar of motorcycle engines shattered the calm. 3 bikes rumbled into the station, their riders oozing bravado. They were clad in leather vests with patches identifying them as members of the Desert Wolves, a local outlaw biker gang known for their intimidation tactics. Rachel had seen their kind before, men who thrived on fear and preyed on the weak. Their leader, a wiry man with a scared face and a cocky swagger, strolled into the store, flanked by 2 burly lieutenants. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Rachel. "Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, his grin crooked and cruel. The lone lady biker out in the middle of nowhere. "Lost, sweetheart." Rachel didn't flinch. She set her coffee down calmly and turned to face them, her posture relaxed but deliberate. "Not lost," she said, her voice even. The leader chuckled. "Cute. But this here's Wolves territory. You want to pass through, you gotta pay the toll." Joe tensed behind the counter, his hand inching toward the shotgun he kept hidden beneath the register. But before he could act, Rachel stepped forward, her eyes locked on the leader's. "And what if I don't?" she asked, her tone deceptively soft. The leader's grin faltered for a moment before he puffed his chest. "Then maybe we teach you a little lesson about respect." Rachel smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Respect is earned, not taken, and you're about to learn why you don't mess with the wrong person." In a flash, she moved. Her hand shot out, gripping the leader's wrist in a vice-like hold. A sharp twist and a precise application of pressure sent him to his knees with a cry of pain. His lieutenants moved to intervene, but Rachel was faster. She disarmed the first with a fluid motion, sending his knife skittering across the floor. The second reached for his gun, but Rachel's foot connected with his wrist, sending the weapon flying. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. The bikers were left groaning on the floor, their leader cradling his wrist as he glared up at Rachel. "Who the hell are you?" he hissed. Rachel leaned in close, her voice low and deadly. "Someone who's seen your kind before. Leave now, and don't come back." The leader's eyes burned with humiliation and rage, but he motioned for his men to retreat. "This ain't over," he spat as they stumbled out of the store. Rachel watched them go, her expression unreadable. When the roar of their bikes faded into the distance, she turned back to Joe, who was staring at her in stunned silence. "Who are you?" he asked finally. "Just passing through," Rachel said, picking up her coffee again. But deep down, she knew the confrontation had changed everything. She had come to Shadow Creek seeking peace, but trouble had found her instead. And as she sipped her coffee, Rachel realized she couldn't walk away. Not yet. The Desert Wolves weren't just a gang of bullies. There was something darker lurking beneath the surface, something that needed to be stopped. Rachel Morrison wasn't just a Navy SEAL. She was a protector, and Shadow Creek was about to learn what that meant. This is the beginning of a longer narrative arc. Let me know if you'd like me to expand on the unfolding events, the cartel connections, and the ultimate showdown that will reshape Shadow Creek. Shadows beneath the red rocks. The Arizona desert simmered in the afternoon heat, but Rachel's mind was colder than steel. Shadow Creek was more than it appeared. A sleepy town masking deep corruption and danger. As she cleaned her Glock at the back of Johnson's gas station, the pieces began falling into place. The desert wolves weren't just a gang harassing locals. They were part of a larger web. The fresh chemical burns on one biker's hands, the mentions of protection rackets, and their confidence all pointed to one conclusion. They were tied to a larger criminal operation. Joe entered the room, his expression grim. He handed Rachel a bottle of water and gestured toward a faded map of the town tacked on the wall. "You sure you want to stick around for this?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Rachel glanced at him. "You know as well as I do that leaving won't fix anything." Joe sighed, rubbing his temples. Shadow Creek wasn't always like this. 20 years ago, it was a good place. Quiet, hard-working folks. Then the wolves showed up, and they weren't just looking for trouble. They brought it with them. Drugs, money laundering, threats. Sheriff Cooper was the last line of defense. But now, he's in their pocket, Rachel finished. Joe nodded. Half the department works for them now. The rest turn a blind eye. They'd got the town scared. Rachel's lips tightened. Fear was a weapon she understood too well. It worked in combat zones and back alleys alike. But it also made people predictable. And that was a vulnerability she could exploit. "Tell me about the copper mine," she said, setting her Glock aside. Joe pointed to the map. "The old mine shut down years ago, but it's the perfect place for a large operation. Isolated, with a maze of tunnels and access routes. You could move anything, or anyone, through there without being seen. I've heard rumors, but nothing concrete. Until now." Rachel raised an eyebrow. Joe gestured to his laptop. "I've been keeping tabs on the wolves' movements. A lot of activity near the mine lately. Big trucks, black SUVs, not just local muscle. These guys are professionals. And then there's this." He clicked through surveillance footage from the station's one functional camera. The grainy video showed a line of vehicles passing through Shadow Creek late at night. SUVs with dark windows, moving in coordinated formation. Rachel leaned forward, her sharp eyes catching something in the footage. A logo, barely visible, on one of the SUV doors. "That's not local," she murmured. "That's cartel." Joe nodded grimly. "I was afraid of that." Rachel straightened, her mind racing. A cartel operation of this scale wouldn't just bring drugs. They'd bring terror. Shadow Creek wasn't just a pit stop. It was a staging ground. And Rachel had just painted a target on her back by standing up to the wolves. Before she could say more, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached their ears. Rachel moved to the window, peering out. A sleek black SUV was parked at the edge of the station lot, its occupants obscured by tinted glass. "They're watching," Joe muttered. "Let them," Rachel replied, her voice steely. The dinner at Maria's. That evening, Rachel met Deputy Sarah Martinez at Maria's diner. The deputy was young but sharp, with a no-nonsense demeanor that Rachel respected immediately. Martinez was one of the few local cops not on Cooper's payroll, and she'd been working quietly to gather evidence against the wolves. "Word travels fast," Martinez said as she slid into the booth across from Rachel. "Heard about your little run-in with Blade and his boys." Rachel sipped her coffee. "Let me guess. They're not happy." Martinez smirked. "That's an understatement. Blade's been calling in reinforcements all day. He's not used to people standing up to him." "Good," Rachel said flatly. Martinez leaned in, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you've got skills. And not the kind you learn in self-defense classes. You're military, right? Special ops." Rachel didn't answer. Martine sighed. Fine, keep your secrets. But if you're planning to take on the wolves, you're gonna need help. They're not just running protection rackets anymore. They're moving something through the mine. Something big. Rachel studied the deputy. She could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of fighting a losing battle in a town that had given up. I don't need help, Rachel said. I need information. Who's running the mine? Martinez hesitated. They call him the surgeon. I don't know his real name, but he's cartel. High level. Specializes in breaking people. Rachel's expression hardened. The name was familiar, too familiar. She crossed paths with the surgeon once before, during a covert mission in Central America. The memory of what they'd found in his wake still haunted her. Does he operate here? Rachel asked. Not yet, Martins replied. But he's coming. They're holding a town meeting in 3 days. Mandatory for all business owners. Word is, the surgeon's using it as cover to finalize his plans. Plans for what? Martinez shook her head. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But if he's here, it means the operation's expanding. They're not just running drugs anymore. They're trafficking people. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Rachel's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. We'll stop them, she said. Martinez raised an eyebrow. We? I thought you didn't need help. I don't, Rachel replied. But this town does. And so do you. The calm before the storm. Over the next 2 days, Rachel and her newfound allies worked tirelessly. Martins provided what intel she could, while Joe used his connections to gather supplies. Maria, the diner owner, proved invaluable. Her years in Shadow Creek had made her a font of local knowledge. Rachel's plan was simple but dangerous. They would use the old smuggling tunnels beneath the town to infiltrate the mine during the town meeting. With the cartel's attention focused on the meeting, Rachel's team would dismantle their operation from the inside. By the time the sun set on the second day, everything was in place. Rachel stood on the roof of the gas station, scanning the horizon through binoculars. The mine was quiet for now, but she could feel the tension building. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Rachel's phone buzzed with a message from her old ghost team commander. Back up on standby. Say the word. Rachel stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. Hold position. This is my fight. She tucked her phone away and took a deep breath. Shadow Creek wasn't just another mission. It wasn't about orders or objectives. It was about people, ordinary people who deserved a chance to live without fear. And Rachel Morrison would give them that chance. The wolves thought they'd brought the fight to her doorstep, but they had no idea what kind of predator they were dealing with. Into the depths. The town of Shadow Creek slept uneasily, its streets cloaked in the kind of silence that only fear could command. To the locals, it was just another quiet night under the cartel's thumb. But for Rachel Morrison, it was the calm before the storm. Perched on the rooftop of Johnson's gas station, Rachel adjusted her night vision goggles and scanned the distant horizon. The mine's entrance glowed faintly under floodlights, a beacon of activity even in the dead of night. Shadows moved purposefully, armed guards patrolling the perimeter, trucks rumbling in and out like clockwork. Joe's voice crackled in her earpiece. Surveillance shows no major movement in the past hour. Martinez is in position at the south tunnel entrance. We're ready when you are. Rachel's gaze lingered on the mine for a moment longer. The enemy was professional, no doubt about it. Their movements were disciplined, their security tight. But every fortress had a weakness, and Rachel had spent the past 2 days finding it. She pressed the comm unit on her vest. Copy that. Moving out. Sliding off the rooftop with practiced ease, Rachel landed silently and joined Joe near the station's back entrance. He handed her a tactical pack containing breaching charges, flashbangs, and extra ammo. You sure about this? He asked, his tone laced with concern. Rachel gave him a small, reassuring smile. We don't win wars by sitting on the sidelines, Joe. Joe nodded, his eyes steely. Then let's finish this. Beneath the surface. The smuggling tunnels beneath Shadow Creek were a relic of another era. Carved out during Prohibition, they had once been used to transport bootleg liquor. Now, they served a far darker purpose. Rachel led the way, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Behind her, Joe and Martinez followed closely, their weapons at the ready. Maria had stayed behind at the church, coordinating intel and keeping an eye on the town meeting set to begin in a few hours. Martinez's voice broke the silence. "You sure the surgeon's here?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "He's here. Men like him don't delegate when it comes to operations this big. He'll want to inspect everything personally." Joe grunted. "Then let's make sure he regrets the trip." The tunnel widened as they approached the central chamber Maria had called the cathedral. Rachel signaled for the group to halt, crouching low and peering around a corner. The sight that greeted her confirmed her worst fears. The cavern was massive, its walls lined with shipping containers and makeshift holding cells. Armed guards patrolled in tight formations, their rifles slung across their chests. Spotlights illuminated the area, revealing dozens of frightened captives, mostly women and children, huddled inside the cells. Martinez whispered, "This is bigger than we thought." Rachel nodded grimly. "And it's about to end." The first strike. Rachel's plan relied on precision and surprise. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small drone, its rotors whisper quiet as it lifted into the air. Guiding it with her tablet, she maneuvered the drone above the guards, capturing live footage of their patrol patterns. "There," she murmured, pointing to a gap in their defenses. "They're weakest near the west containers. We breach there and take out the patrols silently." Joe and Martinez nodded, their faces grim but determined. Rachel led the way, moving like a shadow through the dimly lit cavern. She reached the west containers and signaled for Joe to plant the first breaching charge. The soft beep of the timer was the only sound as they retreated to a safe distance. 3, 2, 1. The explosion was controlled, the sound muffled by the cavern's natural acoustics. Before the dust settled, Rachel was already moving. She neutralized the first guard with a precise strike to the temple, his body crumpling silently to the ground. Joe and Martinez followed suit, taking down the remaining guards in the area. Within minutes, they had cleared a path to the nearest container. Martinez pried open the lock, revealing a group of terrified captives. "You're safe now," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We're getting you out of here." The captives looked at Rachel with wide, fearful eyes. She knelt to meet their gaze, her voice steady. "You're not alone anymore. We're here to help," the surgeon revealed. As the captives were escorted back through the tunnels to safety, Rachel and Joe pressed deeper into the mine. The air grew heavier, the tension almost suffocating. Rachel's instincts screamed that they were getting closer to their target. They reached a command center nestled deep within the cavern. Maps, monitors, and crates of weapons filled the room. And at the center of it all stood a man Rachel recognized instantly, the surgeon. Tall and imposing, he exuded an air of cold, calculated menace. His sharp eyes swept the room, his hands gesturing as he barked orders to his men. Rachel's grip on her weapon tightened. Memories of Guatemala flooded back. Her team's last mission, the innocents they had failed to save, the friends she had lost. Joe whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" Rachel nodded, her voice low. "He's mine." The final showdown. Rachel moved with lethal precision, taking out the guards stationed around the command center before they could raise the alarm. The surgeon turned at the sound of a body hitting the floor, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her. Well, he said, his voice smooth and taunting. "The infamous Rachel Morrison. I've heard about you." "Then you know how this ends," Rachel replied, her tone icy. The surgeon smirked, drawing a sleek pistol. "You think you've won. This operation is bigger than you can imagine. Taking me down won't stop it." Rachel stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "No, but it's a start." The fight was brutal and relentless. The surgeon was skilled, far more than his subordinates, but Rachel's training and resolve were unmatched. The echoes of gunfire and the clash of hand-to-hand combat filled the chamber as they traded blows. In the end, it was Rachel's sheer will that triumphed. She disarmed the surgeon with a swift maneuver, pinning him to the ground. "This is for Guatemala," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. As sirens echoed in the distance, the sound of Martinez's trusted deputies closing in, Rachel stood over the surgeon, her mission finally complete. A new dawn. By morning, the captives had been rescued, the cartel's operation dismantled, and Shadow Creek liberated from its grip of fear. The wolves were gone, their leaders arrested, and the mine sealed for good. Rachel stood on the hill overlooking the town, the first rays of sunlight warming her face. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, not because the fight was over, but because it had been worth it. Joe joined her, his expression one of quiet pride. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Rachel corrected. Shadow Creek was no longer just a stop on her journey. It had become a part of her story, a reminder that even the darkest places could find light again, with a little help. And as Rachel mounted her bike, ready to ride once more, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't running anymore. She was exactly where she was meant to be. They parked a mile out, meeting up with Ghost Team at a secluded spot. Mike greeted Rachel with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "Still leading the charge, I see," he said. Rachel shrugged. "Old habits die hard." Mike gestured to the team, now prepping their gear. "We've got breaching charges, drones, and enough firepower to take down an army. What's the plan?" Rachel laid out the details. The warehouse was heavily guarded, with patrols on the perimeter and surveillance cameras covering the entrances. Their goal was to seize evidence, disable operations, and extract any captives being held on site. "This isn't just about taking them down," Rachel said. "We need to leave a message. Let them know we're coming for them." A message sent. Under the cover of darkness, Ghost Team moved like shadows. Rachel led the charge, her movements fluid and precise. They breached the warehouse with surgical precision, taking down guards and disabling security systems before anyone could sound the alarm. Inside, the scale of the operation became clear. Rows of shipping containers held drugs, weapons, and other illicit goods. But it was the far corner of the warehouse that made Rachel's blood run cold. Another set of holding cells, filled with frightened captives. Mike's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We've got what we need. Time to blow this place." Rachel hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Plant the charges. Make it loud." As they evacuated the captives and secured the evidence, Rachel set the final charge herself. She stepped back, her finger hovering over the detonator. "This is for everyone you've hurt," she whispered. The explosion lit up the night sky, the sound reverberating for miles. By the time law enforcement arrived, the warehouse was a smoldering ruin, and Rachel's team was long gone. The war begins. The warehouse raid sent shockwaves through the cartel's network. Within days, their communications were in chaos, their supply lines disrupted. But Rachel knew this was just the beginning. Back in Shadow Creek, she sat with her team, mapping out their next moves. The cartel would retaliate, and when they did, they would come hard. Mike leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "You realize we've just declared war on one of the most dangerous organizations in the world." Rachel met his gaze, her eyes cold and unwavering. "They declared war first, on this town, on these people. We're just answering the call." Maria set a fresh pot of coffee on the table, her face lined with determination. "Then let's make sure they regret it." As plans took shape and the team prepared for the next strike, Rachel felt a quiet resolve settle over her. She hadn't sought this fight, but now that it had found her, she wouldn't back down. The cartel thought they were untouchable. Rachel Morrison was about to show them how wrong they were. The retaliation. The cartel didn't wait long to strike back. By dawn the day after the warehouse raid, Rachel knew the clock had started ticking. Mike's team was already scanning chatter intercepted from the cartel's encrypted channels. The retaliation was coming, and it wasn't going to be subtle. In Maria's diner, Rachel and her allies sat around a table littered with maps, radios, and hastily scrawled notes. The early morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across their faces. The mood was tense, but focused. "They've already regrouped," Mike said, pointing to a digital map on his tablet. Red markers blinked along key cartel routes, converging on Shadow Creek. "They're bringing in more muscle. Mercenaries, not just their regular guys. They want to make an example out of us. They'll target the town," Martinez said grimly. "That's how they operate. Intimidation. Fear. They'll want to send a message to anyone else thinking about standing up to them." Maria folded her arms, her expression steely. "Let them come. This town has been afraid long enough." Rachel stood, her commanding presence drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "We don't let them get that far. This time, we're the ones sending the message." Preparing the defense. Rachel's plan wasn't about holding the line. It was about striking first, dismantling the cartel's forces before they could set foot in Shadow Creek. She and her team split into groups, each with a specific mission: disrupt the convoy. Mike and 2 ghost team operators would ambush the convoy heading toward Shadow Creek. Armed with explosives and a sniper rifle, their job was to halt the reinforcements before they reached the town. Protect the town. Martinez and her trusted deputies would secure key points in Shadow Creek, evacuating vulnerable residents, and setting up barricades. Intelligence and coordination. Maria and Joe would act as the central command, monitoring communications and coordinating the team's movements from the safety of the church basement. Infiltrate the stronghold. Rachel would lead a small team to the cartel's secondary hub, a fortified ranch 30 miles from town. Taking out this location would cripple their ability to launch further attacks. The ambush. Mike's team lay in wait along a narrow mountain pass, where the cartel convoy would have no room to maneuver. The quiet of the desert night was broken only by the occasional rustle of wind. When the first SUV appeared, Mike's sniper rifle spoke with deadly precision. The lead vehicle's tire exploded, sending it skidding sideways and blocking the road. "Go loud," Mike said into his comm unit. Explosives rigged along the pass detonated, flipping the second and third vehicles. Chaos erupted as mercenaries scrambled to take cover, only to be picked off by Mike's team. Within minutes, the convoy was neutralized. As the dust settled, Mike surveyed the wreckage and muttered, "That should send a message." The ranch infiltration. Meanwhile, Rachel's team approached the cartel's fortified ranch under cover of darkness. The sprawling compound was surrounded by high fences, with guards patrolling in pairs. Rachel's team consisted of herself, Martinez, and 2 ghost team operators. Armed with suppressed weapons and thermal goggles, they slipped past the outer perimeter, taking out guards silently as they moved. The ranch's main building was heavily guarded, but Rachel had planned for this. She planted breaching charges on the rear entrance, signaling for the team to take cover. The explosion was precise, breaching the door without bringing down the structure. Rachel led the charge inside, her Glock at the ready. The firefight that followed was intense but swift. Rachel moved like a force of nature, her every shot precise. Martinez covered her, taking down guards who tried to flank them. They reached the command room, where the cartel's local leader, a man known as Vargas, was waiting. Unlike the surgeon, Vargas wasn't a fighter. He raised his hands immediately, sweat beading on his forehead. "Please," he stammered. "I can give you names, routes, everything. Just don't kill me." Rachel stepped closer, her gaze icy. "You're going to tell us everything anyway." The cartel strikes back. Back in Shadow Creek, the cartel's remaining forces launched their counterattack. Despite the disruption of their convoy, a smaller group of mercenaries made it into town. Martinez's deputies engaged them at the outskirts, a fierce gunfight erupting near the abandoned railway station. The locals, inspired by Rachel's defiance, joined in, using hunting rifles and whatever they had to defend their town. Joe coordinated the defense from the church, his calm voice guiding deputies and civilians alike. Hold the line at Main Street. Reinforcements are inbound. When the dust settled, the cartel's forces had been repelled. The people of Shadow Creek stood together, battered but victorious. Turning the tide. By dawn, Rachel and her team returned to Shadow Creek with Vargas in custody and a treasure trove of intel. Maps, coded documents, and encrypted drives. Everything they needed to dismantle the cartel's operations across the region. As the town gathered in the church, Rachel stood before them, her voice steady but filled with conviction. This isn't just about Shadow Creek. This is about standing up to those who think they can take what they want, destroy lives, and walk away. You've proven that courage doesn't come from strength. It comes from refusing to back down. Together, we've sent a message. Shadow Creek is off limits. The crowd erupted into cheers, their fear replaced by a newfound sense of hope. A new mission. That night, Rachel sat on the steps of the church, the weight of the day finally catching up to her. Mike joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You did good today," he said. Rachel stared out at the quiet town, her expression pensive. "It's not over. This was just one piece of the puzzle." Mike nodded. "Then let's keep going. There are more towns like this, more people who need help, and we're damn good at what we do." Rachel smiled faintly. "Yeah, we are." As the stars stretched across the sky, Rachel Morrison knew her journey wasn't over. The cartel had made a mistake when they came to Shadow Creek, and she was going to make sure they never made it again. Shadows dispelled. As dawn broke over Shadow Creek, the town was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. The battle was over, and though the scars of the conflict lingered in broken windows, damaged storefronts, and weary faces, there was also something new in the air: hope. Rachel Morrison stood at the edge of Main Street, watching as the townsfolk began to rebuild. Families swept debris from their porches. Children cautiously ventured outside, and shopkeepers opened their doors with cautious optimism. For the first time in years, Shadow Creek felt like it belonged to its people again. Justice for Shadow Creek. The evidence Rachel and her team had uncovered was already making waves. Federal agents, spurred on by undeniable proof of corruption, arrested Sheriff Cooper and several of his deputies. The cartel's operations in the region were exposed, leading to raids and arrests across multiple states. But Rachel knew better than to see this as the end. Corruption ran deep, and cartels had a way of resurfacing like weeds. This victory was significant, but it wasn't permanent. Martinez approached Rachel as she stood near the gas station, her badge freshly polished and her stance proud. "The feds want to talk to you," she said. Rachel smirked. "Let me guess, they want to recruit me or put me under surveillance." "Both," Martinez replied with a grin. Then, more seriously, she added, "They'll try to spin this, make it about them. But we know the truth, and so does this town. That's what matters." Rachel nodded. "You've got good people here, Martinez. Keep them safe. They'll look to you now." "And you." Rachel looked toward her motorcycle, the sleek machine gleaming in the morning light. "This was never my home, but it's yours. You've got what it takes to keep the wolves at bay." Martinez extended her hand. "If you ever need backup, you know where to find us." Rachel shook her hand firmly. "Same goes for you." A lesson in courage. Before she left, Rachel stopped by Maria's diner one last time. The familiar smell of coffee and apple pie greeted her as she stepped inside. Maria was behind the counter, wiping down the surface with a quiet determination. "You're leaving," Maria said, not looking up. Rachel slid onto a stool, her leather jacket creaking as she leaned forward. "The town doesn't need me anymore. You've got this." Maria set a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. "I don't know about that. People like you don't come around often. You stood up when no one else could." Rachel took a sip, savoring the taste. "It wasn't just me. Shadow Creek found its courage. Sometimes people just need someone to remind them they're stronger than they think. Maria smiled faintly. Maybe. But don't forget, even warriors need rest. Rachel nodded, a rare softness in her expression. Maybe one day. The road ahead. As Rachel rode out of Shadow Creek, her bike slicing through the desert air, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The town's fight had rekindled something in her, a belief that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Shadow Creek wasn't the end of her journey, it was a waypoint. There were more towns like it, more people who needed someone willing to stand between them and the darkness. Rachel had spent years fighting wars for others, following orders that sometimes left her questioning her purpose. But now she had found a new mission, one that was hers alone. A lasting legacy. In Shadow Creek, life began to return to normal. The people rebuilt their homes and their trust in one another. The diner buzzed with conversation, the church rang with laughter during Sunday services, and the town square filled with the sound of children playing. And when people spoke of the battle that freed their town, they told stories of a lone woman on a motorcycle, a warrior who appeared when they needed her most, who taught them that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. In the end, Shadow Creek didn't just survive, it thrived. And though Rachel Morrison was gone, the lesson she left behind remained. Sometimes, we all need someone to remind us that we're stronger than we think. But the real strength comes when we find the courage to stand together. As the sun set over the red rock formations, the town's shadows grew long, but the darkness no longer held power over them. Shadow Creek was free, and its people had reclaimed their home and their hope. This ending ties up Rachel's story while leaving room for reflection and inspiration. It highlights the themes of courage, community, and the enduring impact of standing up for what's right. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.